and it's hard to listen to. I want to start with an acknowledgement that it has been an honor for me to work with an organization called the Humanity Project in Fond du Lac. The full name is the Humanity Project, the Untold Story. And this is not from their mission statement, this is from the mind of Jim Coakley, but the purpose is to educate those in the county about the history and current existence of racism with the hope of creating a more inclusive, peaceful, and thriving community in the Fond du Lac area. It's an all-volunteer team, and it's a diverse group of leaders in the community. And particularly, there's a lot of focus of folks from the Fond du Lac public school system. Now, each month there are 2-hour-long virtual programs on the first Tuesday, one at noon and a second at 6:30 in the evening. And they have been organized and developing their curriculum for months. And then when they came and asked me if I would help them running tech, I'm the Andy for them, tech support. I was so pleased that they asked because I've had an opportunity to contribute in a meaningful way. And it's also been highly educational for me, not only to get to know more people in the community, more diverse people in the community, for me to be reminded of the long history of resilience and change for African Americans in US society, but also about the facts and details of how this recent history is playing out in Fond du Lac. Now, this month's theme for our services is called Resilience Through Change. And then there's this overlay of Martin Luther King Jr. Sunday. And so to me, I thought it was a perfect opportunity to lift up this wonderful endeavor. I'd also like to point out that this is the second version of the project. The first was started, I think, about a decade ago. That might be too long ago, but it's supported by many members of the Open Circle Fellowship. And back in those days, they held the meetings in the fellowship, and it was harder to get people to come and attend meetings physically in the location than at night during the winter and that kind of thing. But this time around, the leadership has grown to new leaders and much more diverse. And it's also helped, frankly, that it's virtual because many more can attend. People just tune in during their lunch hour or maybe right after they've had dinner while they're cooking it even. And so on an average Tuesday, we pull in about 110 to 120 points of contact across the 2 sessions. So what have I learned in that? Black history in America tells the endless story of resilience for over 400 years. At certain points in time, the conditions have been ripe for leaders and significant change to occur, for new leaders to rise up and significant change to occur. And today we often refer to this as MLK Sunday because it's the one Sunday of the year we make sure that we focus on that particularly remarkable orator and how incredible he was as a change agent in America, particularly in the South. Now, as I mentioned in my education moment, King is best known for his loyalty to and dogged insistence on a completely nonviolent approach to civil rights. I think, frankly, that comes from a deep down belief that the dominant white society had or has an ethical core that he could appeal to. He believed strongly in the utopic ideas of justice and equality and always lifted that up as what the ideal for America was. He kept reminding everyone that America from its founding was meant to lift up equality and justice. And we just need to get to there in a very integrated, equal society. He believed that he could make a difference appealing to the population and its leaders. And he was very successful in his lifetime. And that's obviously why we honor him on his birthday every year in January. Now, we've achieved a lot of progress, but I wonder if we really achieved the utopia envisioned by Martin Luther King Jr. or even Malcolm X about 55 years ago that they talk about in these speeches. Now, there are many successes that King could probably only have dreamed of. The one that's cited, obviously, is President Obama. I come from a corporate background, and it was always amazing to me, even in Neenah, Wisconsin, how diverse and integrated the environment that I was working in had become. It became clear that the company I worked for highly valued diversity and realized that they would be stronger the more diverse the workforce, the creative workforce in particular, at the headquarters that they had employed to help meet the needs of society. But then in sports, arts, entertainment, politics, all are becoming much more integrated than they were in the days of the 50s and 60s of Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X. And some African Americans have become exceedingly wealthy and powerful. People often talk about Oprah, right? Or Friday night, we had our little Let's Talk, and we viewed a TED Talk by Melanie Hobson. And she talks about colorblind and color brave. And she's an incredible speaker. And I'm not up on pop culture and I didn't know much about her. So I actually looked her up because someone else had recommended the video. And it turns out she is now the CEO of Starbucks recently. And she was part of an investment firm that she had helped start. And before that, she was part of DreamWorks. And she actually, is also the wife of George Lucas. So it was an incredible from rags to riches story because she grew up as the smallest of 6 children in Chicago with a single mom in an environment where they often got their lights shut off or didn't quite have enough to eat, but somehow was able to make her way, right? So there are a lot of success stories, but the Humanity Project tells me the untold story. Right? It tells us the stuff that we don't see in the press. Last month, they pointed out the huge gaps in wealth, primarily driven by lack of home ownership that's passed down then from generation to generation in the white families, those wealths, accumulated wealth, that hasn't happened as readily in the communities of color, particularly the Black community. This month, there's a focus on the school to prison pipeline. And they talked about the education gap and the graduation gaps and all kinds of gaps in the populations, even in Fond du Lac. So by any measure of overall health and well-being, African American society still lags grossly behind. And we have some of the worst offenses in some of our major cities, particularly Milwaukee and Chicago, big cities that are nearby. But so not only is a lot of this disparity not resolved itself in the 55 years since Martin Luther King Jr. and Malcolm X were leaders, but we also have unprecedented violence, particularly in 2020 and 2021. Black Lives Matter movement. It started out as something that was kind of radical with people being upset because Black men were dying at a high rate for almost no reason. And then it grew and grew into massive riots last summer. And then suddenly people started paying attention to it. But they didn't really pay attention to it until it became massive. And it was in every city and there was violence everywhere and people started paying attention. I was just watching the playoff game yesterday and it reminded me again of how the NFL had always resisted the take a knee approach to highlighting injustice in the Black community, in the Black Lives Matter movement. And now suddenly they're on board and there's anti-racism commercials and all kinds of slogans you see on uniforms and on the sidelines. What a change has been made, but it took huge amount of protests that weren't always nonviolent. And then most recently, the assault on Capitol Hill. The mega white supremacist armed conflict. That wasn't new either. We had the Michigan State House before that. We had Charlottesville before that. And so there's been all these movements, anti-racist movements going on for years, but only when it became violent did we finally sit up and take notice and do something about it. So you just sat and listened to 2 speeches for 5 minutes each, and I don't want to ramble on and on and on. So today, the whole idea of my sermon and this whole service was to get you to think. to ask if Martin Luther King Jr.'s call should have been different, or maybe if he were still living today, his call would be different. Should it be more like Malcolm X? This is the question I proposed to the group on Wednesday night. And we had a robust discussion about it. And actually, I think the majority of us felt that maybe things should have been different. So I'd love to have you have a conversation. So this is how we framed the question. Was Malcolm X right after all? Would Black nationalism maybe have been a better choice? Is a pacifist, nonviolent approach ultimately successful? Maybe it only takes you so far, but it doesn't cross the finish line. It doesn't get you ultimately there. Does society only respond and pay attention to violence, sadly? Does real change only come from violent revolution, as Malcolm X states? It seems like the history in the last year seems to suggest this is so in America. So that's really what it's about. I'd love to have you break out into discussions during the breakout sessions